Hello, my name is Jacob Totson, and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. Today we're going to be discussing the ancient cults of Rome. When we hear the word cult today, we immediately think about situations like what happened in Waco, Texas, or the events of the Heaven's Gate cult that led to the death of 42 people. This has only been cemented in our minds as television shows and movies have taken up producing large productions about these cults and their leaders, and in some situations even romanticizing them as individuals. However, the word cult means something very different to the ancient Roman, who not only had many cults within their society, but also accepted the majority of them as part of the religious structure. Furthermore, an ancient cult of Rome is still alive today as one of the biggest religions in the world. With an introduction like that, let us go over what the word cult actually means as it is literally defined by the dictionary. A system of religious veneration and devotion directed towards a particular figure or object. Now, this definition still stands today. However, the modern usage of the term cult has changed, and it seems like for the most part, the terminology around cult changed around the 1960s and 70s, so really not that long ago. With that out of the way, let me go ahead and summarize a little bit for you the way Roman religion was structured during the Roman Empire. As many of you know, the Roman mythology and pantheon were heavily adapted from Greek mythology and beliefs. And this was largely done out of the fact that Greek religion and culture was very prominent during the early formation of Rome, during the story of Romulus and Remus that led to the formation of the Roman kingdom, and then eventually the Republic, and then leading to the Empire. It wasn't until Numa, the second king of Rome, that religion became a priority to the society, and during Numa's rule, there was a long period of peace as the society focused on their structure as well as the religious structure. It was most likely during this time that the religious beliefs of the Romans were formalized under what we mostly know today. Now, through the evolution of Roman society, the needs of religion as an actual spiritual experience were definitely lessened, and the need of religion as a way to propagate the nationalism that was Rome was the primary importance. The main thing to take out of this section is the fact that the Roman religion, at least as it evolved through time, was more about establishing the state mindset, establishing some form of nationalism towards Rome, and in fact, many of the rituals and holidays that were performed by the hierarchy of the religious practice were all about honoring and giving offerings to the Roman state for success and victory and prosperity, and it's perhaps seemed like it worked for a very long time. Rome became quite successful over the hundreds of years that it was the dominant force of the European continent. But by giving all these different offerings to the Roman state, it definitely seems like it left a lot of room for personal belief, and the personal spiritual beliefs of the individual were not as important to the Roman state. And this is one of the reasons that cults became popular. It's because it gave people a personal religious practice that they could be a part of. Within the official Roman religion, this is where we get our first cult that I want to discuss, and that was the Imperial Cult. And all of this was centered around the god Jupiter, who was the embodiment of the Roman emperor or the state itself. This cult was obviously overseen and made up primarily of the aristocracy. And we see this a lot among conquering generals and lording governors in the frontier who would often build temples or statues to Jupiter upon completion of a task or before a large campaign. There are many different cults to talk about, and I'm going to focus on a few to kind of give you an idea of what these cults were, especially the big ones that I think a lot of people would be interested in watching this video. But understand that cults themselves were very prominent, and there was various different cults that existed across the empire, particularly on the frontier regions that were recently conquered or in the process of being conquered. And so typically this meant that people started to have cults of particular deities, like the cults we see to war gods on the frontier states, including cults to war gods of the Britannic people in Britannia. Now, I can't remember the exact name of this deity, but I remember reading about it, and I'll put the name here if I can find it. But it was a part of the Roman cavalry, and so the cavalry soldiers were very important to the victories that the Romans had across the frontier. And a lot of these soldiers, these cavalrymen, would actually venerate a Celtic or Gallic horse god deity, and they were part of this cult of the cavaliermen. So very interesting small bits of cults that were hidden across the frontier, and so many of them that we probably have no information of. Now, there are three main cults that I want to talk about here that I think people will be interested in. First one being the cult of Isis. The cult of Isis goes back for centuries, even during the Roman Empire, as Isis was a deity from ancient Egypt that eventually made its way through the Greek world and then into the Roman world. naturally going through many different iterations and personal votive shrines and ideas as this cult evolved over hundreds of years. As it survived in Rome, the cult of Isis was very popular among women. Little is known about the cult itself and the rituals that they performed. However, we do know that they had levels of initiation, and they had hymns that they would sing to Isis and songs and poems, and so they had veneration of Isis. But again, we just don't know that much because the cult of Isis was a mystery cult. Now, a mystery cult means exactly what the name implies, is that this cult was a secret society. We see this survive today. There are numerous secret societies that people focus on and attract this kind of romantic idea of a secret. And I think, again, particularly to women who didn't have much in society that they were allowed to participate in, having something that was secret to even men or people outside of the cult, I think was a very alluring thing. The next cult I wish to discuss is the cult of Sibley, also known as the Magna Martyr, was a very polarizing, complicated, and fascinating cult of the ancient world. As it existed in ancient Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, it was a mother goddess cult that was centered around ecstasy, cycles, womanhood, and victory. As with the cult of Isis, the cult of Sibley entered Greece first. It was there in Greece that the Galli priest class was added to the religious practices of the cult of Sibley. And this came in the form of men who would castrate themselves and then wear only women's clothing during rituals. Now, to the Roman Empire, castration was actually illegal to free citizens and was frowned upon during the entering of the cult of Sibley. However, as Rome grew, so did the popularity of the cult of Sibley, to the point where there were processions of Galli priests going down the street, ringing bells and playing music, flagellating themselves, and carrying idols of Sibley down the road. Despite its high barrier of entry to priesthood, this cult of Sibley was very popular among the lower class, as they really weren't participants within Roman religion, or the Imperial Cult, or the other cults that were not really available to them. Especially in the cities, the cult of Sibley seemed to grow very quickly. This growth did not bode well for the cult, as the Roman Empire began to see the cult of Sibley as a weakness to their society, as the Roman image of masculinity was under attack by the priests of the Galli. And around the 1st and 2nd centuries, attempts were made to lessen the power of the cult, and it was eventually turned into a mockery by the Roman elite. Therefore, the cult of Sibley did not survive the Roman Empire and faded into memory long before the Roman Empire fell in the 5th century. It is now that we've arrived at the main subject matter of this video, or at least the reason that I did this research, and that is the cult of Mithras. Because here in Londinium, right behind me, is the wall of Londinium that was originally built by the Romans. Now, obviously, you can see layers of different stone here as it was continued to be maintained and rebuilt over hundreds of years, even into the medieval period, and even into the late Middle Ages. This survived the Blitzkrieg of World War II, and it's still here. Do you know what else happened during the Blitzkrieg of World War II? The unearthing of one of the largest Mithraic temples ever to be found. Only 3 blocks away from here, the head of Mithras, an ancient deity originally coming from Iran, was found, showing that here in Londinium, one of the farthest reaches of the empire, there was the god Mithras. And there was actually a lot of evidence for Mithraic worship here in Britannia in the frontier. As I said, the cult of Mithras originated in 2000 BCE in the Indo-Iranian Middle East. This transitioned to Zoroastrian beliefs in the 6th century BCE, and then eventually found its way to Rome in around 60 BCE and became popular in the 1st century. This cult was also all for men and mostly attracted soldiers, business owners, and other middle-class workers. And it appears that there were very few aristocrats to join this cult. They met in underground temples that were all very similar to one another, and the main image of all of these Mithraic temples were the Romanized version of Mithras slitting the throat of a bull. Well, there are a lot of different theories about that, and one of the theories that I found online that I don't know is backed by any scholarly articles or research, but the zodiac signs were becoming very popular around this time as well. And so there are images of Mithras slaughtering the bull, but also a snake and a scorpion and a dog being a part of the image. And so you have the sun, which is Mithras, slaughtering Taurus, and then the other zodiac, Scorpio, and the other zodiac signs I don't remember. And so there was this whole idea in a chart I saw about how it's about the sun going through the stars and all this stuff. But again, I haven't found this any other place besides this one slideshow I found that someone made. But there was a lot of details about it, and I can't say 100%, but there could be some kind of zodiac connection about Mithras here. That I'm not really sure. One component of this slaughtering the bull that does seem to be prevalent was the sharing of a meal, because oftentimes in these Mithraic temples, there was a long table in the center where people would sit, and there have been remnants of food scraps being found there as well. And so the idea of a ritual meal, eating from the flesh of the bull that Mithras was slaying, appears to be one of the rituals that was conducted. Now, while this cult was a mysteries cult, we do know that there were 7 levels of Mithraic initiation. The first one being Raven, then Occult, then Soldier, then Lion, then Persian, then Runner of the Sun, and finally Father. Now, within the Mithraeum here in London, there is a recreation of a Mithraic ritual that is played for you in the museum, and that's really all there is in the museum, and it is really interesting. They have recreated a ritual to Mithras. It involves singing, drums, chanting, music, and then a light show for them, and all these different elements. And it was really cool to see, and they really try to bring alive the space to what it would have been like in the past. So the cult of Mithras, it was very popular. 700 plus temples across the Roman Empire. So what happened to them? Well, 2 things. 1, the Roman Empire fell, and 2, the other cult won. But what is this other cult? Well, it still survives today, because some of you may know, and some people may deny, the fact that Christianity was a cult of Rome, the cult of Christ, and it was not loved by the Roman government because it inspired the poor to live their lives and be happy, and that the meek should inherit the earth. Now, of course, the Roman government did not like the idea of the plebes owning the earth, and so they had to snuff out this cult of Christ. And they did this much more aggressively than they snuffed out the cult of Sibley, and they really did persecute the Christians. They killed them in the arenas, they killed them with lions, they hung them and crucified them and all these things to try to crush it. But the problem with Christianity is that it's a martyr religion, and the more you make them martyrs, the more it becomes prominent. And so the cult of Christianity was very popular, and became more and more popular among the lower class, and that, combined with the fact that the Roman Empire was full of corruption, poor spending habits, and just got way too big for their own good, the empire began to fall. And then as the government and the Roman ideal and nationalism began to crumble, Christianity began to replace it. So yes, one of the most popular religions of the world today all started as the cult of Christ within the Roman Empire. The rest is very well known history. Christianity began to spread out of the newly formed Christian Empire of Rome. The pagan religions and cult of the ancient world faded into memory. And that is ultimately why I made this video for you today, is so that they truly do not fade away into such memory that we do not know of them anymore. And while I'm not interested in reviving any of these ancient cults today, in particular the cult of Sibley, as I do not want to castrate myself, I do still find them fascinating parts of history, and I also hope that you've enjoyed this video on the ancient cults of Rome.